Matthew 13. On that day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the seaside. What day is this? Well, he's just come from earlier in the day when his disciples were hungry and they were getting the grain and they were eating it, and he confronted the Pharisees. Well, they confronted him about it. And then he went on and went into their synagogue where he had a confrontation about whether it's good to heal on the Sabbath. Yes. Okay. And then he goes and he's teaching, and there's a bunch of stuff going on, including all the way up to his family comes, and they're like, hey, we want to see you and maybe take you away from here. And he's like, well, let me tell you who my real family is. So Jesus has already had a day. And that day, he's now going out of the house and sat by the seaside. Great multitudes gathered to him, so that he entered into a boat and sat, and all the multitudes stood on the beach. He spoke to them many things in parables, saying. So he gets into a boat to get away from the shore a little bit, and apparently they found the place where they believe this happened, where there's actually a little natural amphitheater with the ground going up into a steep side there, and so there's kind of like this natural acoustic thing going on. Pretty awesome. And he is getting further back from the crowds that, they're not crowding him, and he can then speak to all of them. Behold, a farmer went out to sow. As he sowed, some seeds fell by the roadside, and the birds came and devoured them. Others fell on rocky ground where they didn't have much soil, and immediately they sprang up because they had no depth of earth. When the sun had risen, they were scorched. Because they had no root, they withered away. Others fell among thorns. The thorns grew up and choked them. Others fell on good soil and yielded fruit. Some 100 at times as much, some 60 and some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. So Jesus is speaking in a parable. We actually have parables now. Aesop's fables are probably a good example of that. And you've got foxes, and they're trying to get stuff out of the long-necked tube and all, you got all that kind of stuff. And so it's not about like, hey, this actually happened or anything like that, but rather this is a thing to tell something. Although in this case, Jesus is talking to, farmers, the everyday people who probably all had very close experience with this. Okay, as you're going along, you're walking on a footpath and you're scattering your seed, and you kind of have this little path through the thing, and maybe you've done your tilling beforehand, you scatter the seeds and then you till again, or maybe you just till it afterward. Okay, and so seeds would fall in all of these different kind of conditions. So this is pretty common. People are like, that makes sense. But what's he talking about? I hope you understand. Here we go. Because then Jesus said, then the disciples came and said to him, why do you speak to them in parables? Why are you doing this? And he answered them, to you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but it is not given to them. For whoever has, to him will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever doesn't have, from him will be taken away even that which he has. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because seeing they don't see, and hearing they don't hear, neither do they understand. In them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, by hearing you will hear, and will in no way understand. Seeing you will see, but in no way perceive. For this people's heart has grown calloused. Their ears are dull of hearing, and they have closed their eyes, or else perhaps they might perceive with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their heart, and would turn again, and I would heal them. So Jesus talks in parables, and his disciples are like, why are you doing that? And Jesus is like, because I don't want them to get it. Which is just like crazy talk, right? Like Jesus is here, he's preaching, he's talking, he doesn't actually want people to understand what he's talking about. Why is that? Because Jesus isn't actually interested in people who just follow him around, who just want to hear what he has to say, who just want to have this thing. He's not interested in people like that. What Jesus wants are followers. People who will actually dig in and learn what it is and get that insider information. And he says, by the way, that's you guys. But for these people, I'm not giving it to them. Because even what they have is going to be taken away from them. Because God does not want people whose hearts are not open to this, who aren't willing to go. Okay? So what is this all about? Okay? Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For most certainly I tell you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see the things which you see and didn't see them, and to hear things which you hear and didn't hear them. So Jesus says, not only are these people, kind of rejected, and so they're not going to understand what I'm talking about, but even the righteous people of old wanted this. They really wanted to have what you guys have, and you're getting better than the righteous people of the past. Right? Here then, the parable of the farmer. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and doesn't understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away that which has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown by the roadside. What was sown on the rocky places, this is he who hears the word and immediately with joy receives it, yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. When opposition or persecution arises because of the world, immediately he stumbles. What was sown among the thorns, this is he who hears the word, but the cares of this age and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. What was sown on the good ground, that is he who hears the word and understands it, who most certainly bears fruit and produces some 100 times as much, some 60, and some 30. And we've already talked about what is this good fruit, okay? It's not about just finding souls and saving them or anything, but actually having your life transformed and doing good things. And so notice that Jesus is it's actually the condition of the person when the word comes. When the seed gets sown, it's your heart condition that affects what happens. Maybe the enemy comes and just steals it right away. It doesn't even penetrate you, nothing. Or it penetrates you, but you've got no depth. And so stuff gets hard and you're never mind, I'm not doing this. Or you discover it and you're this is amazing. I actually really like this. This is really cool. But then life gets difficult and there's financial stuff and you're I don't know. And so that means you lose it. But those who are really ready for this, the good soil, people open to this, they're going to have the transforming thing that happens from it. And that's what Jesus wants. He said another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while people slept, his enemy came and sowed darnel weeds also among the wheat and went away. But when the blade sprang up and produced grain, then the darnel weeds appeared also. The servants of the household came and said to him, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where did the darnel weeds come from? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. The servants asked him, Do you want us to go and gather them up? But he said, No, lest perhaps while you gather up the darnel weeds, you root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the harvest time, I will tell the reapers, First, gather up the darnel weeds and bind them in bundles and burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So Jesus has used another agrarian parable here to tell them. This is a very common thing where you have these two different plants that look very similar in their younger stages. And then as they actually mature, you're oh no, those are not good. Okay, so this is very common. Again, his normal everyday people would be oh, I know about that problem. Oh my goodness, yeah, that's no good. Okay, and it's interesting because Jesus is talking to the poor here. He's talking to the average person, whereas a lot of other religious teachers of his day wouldn't have bothered. Don't go to them. They're not going to do anything with this. Isn't it interesting, right? That Jesus is yeah, okay, who's actually going to get something out of this? Okay. He said to them another parable. He spoke another parable to them. Oh, sorry. He said another parable before them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is smaller than all seeds. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herb and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in its branches. And so he says that this is, of course, the smallest seed. A mustard seed is small, but it's not the small seed. It's not even the smallest seed that they would have had access to. So when we talked about John the Baptist being the greatest, and you can have multiple greatest, this is the smallest. There's multiple smallest, okay? But again, Jesus is using a very common trope of his day of here is a tiny thing that becomes a giant thing, okay? So he's using that for this. And this mustard seed, it starts out with a really small seed, and I guess apparently you can get 15-foot tall mustard plants from this, which is just crazy. That's huge. Now, the average is 4 feet, I guess, but this can become big. And what's interesting to me is this idea of the birds come and lodge in its branches. It made me think of passages Ezekiel 31. And there was another passage. I thought it was in Daniel. I didn't find it, but and I had it before. But now, okay, so here it is. It's talking about this kingdom, right? That's coming, and it's giant. It's bigger than all the other trees. It's boughed, multiplied, and the branches became long by reason of the many waters, which because it's getting water, and they spread out. And the birds of the air made their nests in its boughs. Under its branches, all the animals of the field gave birth to their young. All great nations lived under its shadow. And so I kind of wonder if this like branches thing is actually like world tree imagery and stuff like that. I didn't see any commentaries that were suggesting this or recommending it, but like it just feels too cosmic big to not be that. So I don't know. What do you think? Have you run into that? I don't know. But like for me, this feels like, okay, this isn't just like, hey, small to big, but this is like the kingdom of God starts small and then it ultimately like becomes the whole cosmos. It becomes the whole thing. I think that's really interesting. He spoke another parable to them. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal until it was all leavened. And so back in Genesis, we actually have Sarai who prepares 60 pounds, I think is what it is, of flour, which is like, the maximum amount that you could possibly wrestle as a person to knead this in. And she prepares that for the 3 strangers. Similar amount here. I believe the 3 measures, similar thing. And so you start with just a little bit, and you just kind of mix it all the way through. And you've got your yeast, which is kind of the dry stuff that goes in, or you can have leaven, which is where it's bread that's already been, it's already had the yeast applied, and then you just save a little bit of that and then mix it in as well. So you can have that too if you've heard that language in the past with leavening bread and stuff like that. So mixing it in. Again, this idea of we've got this little thing that ends up permeating everything. Jesus spoke all these things in parables to the multitudes, and without a parable, he didn't speak to them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken through the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden from the foundations of the world. So this is now Matthew looking at this and saying, okay, this reminds me of something. Okay, and if you go over to Psalm 78 there, it says, hear my teaching, my people. Turn your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. Okay, and then what it does is it just keeps going and going, and this whole thing recounts Israel's history of not listening to God, of not trusting God, of God doing something amazing, and then they miss it. And it just keeps going and going with that, and it's pretty amazing. You should read it sometime. But then in the end, ultimately, it ends with, he chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the ewes and that have their young. He brought him to be the shepherd of Jacob, his people, and Israel, his inheritance. He was their shepherd according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands, which I think is just so interesting that here Matthew is pulling on that to say, hey, Jesus is doing the same thing, right? So I think that's really great. Okay. Then Jesus sent the multitudes away and went into the house, and his disciples came to him saying, explain to us the parable of the darnel weeds of the field. Okay, and you might have heard it as tares or the weeds and the wheat. Okay, so I think darnel weeds is kind of interesting. I mean, like apparently that's the actual plant, but like that's very distracting for me, I guess. He answered them, he who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seeds are the children of the kingdom, and the darnel weeds are the children of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the darnel weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that cause stumbling, and those who do iniquity, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So Jesus explains all the little pieces of this particular parable, saying, okay, these people are that, okay, all of that kind of stuff. And in this case, notice who's actually going to sort this out at the end. It's the angels under the direction of Jesus. So I think one of the things that we can take from this, I heard this somewhere, is that because you can't tell the difference, or by uprooting this one, you might take that one with you, that's not our job. We're here to grow and to bear fruit. But the people who are ultimately going to sort this out, the ones who are going to ultimately sort this out, are the angels. That's not our job. It's not our job to say, oh, you belong in the kingdom. You're out. You're in. And so people who do that kind of thing are actually doing the job that the reapers, angels, are going to be doing later on. Right now, our job is to grow and to produce good fruit. So let's get on that, okay? All right. Jesus goes on with more parables, okay? Again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. In his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys the field. So apparently there were a lot of stories like this because you didn't have banks and like your house, like you just dig through the walls and steal people's treasure. So like if you had a lot of treasure, then what you did is you went and found a field, a place, and you buried it. And apparently we even have like maps that are like, hey, start here and go this far and then turn and then under this tree and blah, blah, blah. So like, there were a lot of stories about what if you, okay, poor person, regular person, average Joe, found treasure. Oh my goodness, wouldn't that be amazing? And Jesus is like, yeah, so the kingdom of heaven is like a guy who's wandered through a field, finds it, is like, buries it again so that nobody, knows that it's here, and then goes and sells all that he has to buy the field because it's that valuable. Okay, so Jesus is like, hey, what if you found treasure and you realized that it was worth more than everything you had? Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who is a merchant seeking fine pearls, who, having found one pearl of great price, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. I don't know. I don't often feel like the kingdom of heaven is worth everything. I mean, like, intellectually, I know it. Like, I've taught this before. Like, I get it. But, like, there's this emotional side of it that they're going out with joy and getting rid of everything so that they can afford to be this, to have this. That's the kind of followers that Jesus wants. That's what Jesus wants. Jesus doesn't want just people to be like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Jesus wants people who are going to follow him, who are going to give up everything because they see the value of the kingdom. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some fish of every kind, which, when it was filled, fishermen drew up onto the beach. They sat down and gathered the good into containers, but the bad they threw away. So it will be in the end of the world. The angels will come and separate the wicked from among the righteous and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay, so again, this is just like the other one, right? Where they actually had dragnets where they would take I believe it was between two boats, okay, and they have the big net, and then they would weigh the other end of the net and drop it over the side so that it sank down, and they kind of like go to shore and just scoop up everything, and then they'd pull that on shore, and then they'd sort everything there. And again, who's sorting? It's the angels. It's not us. We're not here saying, you belong in the kingdom, you do not, oh, you're valuable, you're not, like, that is not our job. That's later, okay? And then Jesus says, have you understood these things? He said, yes, Lord. He said to them, therefore, every scribe who has been made a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like a man who is a householder, who brings out his treasure, new and old things. And I love that, like, he ends, like, this section with, like, another parable. So, like, if you're a scribe, if you're somebody who gets this, if you're somebody who has this, you're like someone who can go and get old and new treasure and, like, all this stuff. And the commentary that I was reading said, this is like people who now can look back and see, okay, yeah, the Old Testament, that's got this treasure, this thing, you got this? Isn't that cool? Okay, but now we also have the kingdom. The kingdom of God has come because Jesus has brought it. And so now we have this extra, this new treasure, as well as the old treasure. It's not that the old treasure is now worthless and gone, but instead, we've got this new treasure too, okay? I think that's really, really awesome. Okay, and then there's a little bit more, but yeah, we're gonna talk about that next time. So we have it, a bunch of parables about what the kingdom of heaven is like. And I don't know, just keep leaning into those because Jesus doesn't want people to just be like, yeah, okay, got it, cool, thank you. We're supposed to be following and growing fruit, right?